There we are. We are live again, all the way from Malaysia to the United States of America. Welcome back to Open Room. It's a real pleasure to be doing this at a totally different time of day across the planet with two other women who probably rival me in their passion for empathy. So, Sascha and Corinna, thank you so much for joining us today.
Absolutely. Thank you for having us.
Yeah, we're so excited to be here.
Yeah, I'm so excited to be here for everyone that's tuning in. And I know it's probably the morning for many of our sort of network who are in Asia and the Middle East. So, happy Friday. Starting the day talking about all things empathy and what that really means to these two phenomenal women over in the US from an organization called Empathy in Action. We obviously met through that mutual passion for the role of empathy in our world and what it could do and how it can change lives. So, Corinna, I'm going to start with you because you and I have just had a little bit of conversation about this before as well. Tell us a little bit about how you got here. What is your origin story? How did you end up setting up a consultancy all about empathy?
Awesome. Thank you for that question, Mimi. And hello to everyone across the world tuning in. Whether you're on Mimi's side of the world or our side, we're excited to be having this conversation with you all. My name is Corinna Espino, she, her. I'm the Chief Empathy Officer at Empathy in Action Consulting. And this was just a crazy idea that Sascha and I had in November 2020. We had been spending months in a conversation, concerned and holding our community really at the core of our conversations, just really recognizing that our workplaces, our schools, a lot of our traditional systems were not set up for that moment, right? They were not set up for a moment where the entire world was experiencing stress and trauma in a way we haven't collectively done in a long time. And there also was this kind of racial reckoning that was happening on an international scale that started in our homegrown space of the United States. And so I think in just some really honest dialogues between Sascha and I and our concern for how our kids were doing and how the youth were experiencing all of this, we wanted to be part of those solutions. We wanted to be part of the creative change. And I think one theory that's kind of been at the heart of most of what we do is not being scared of conflict, right? As seeing this moment of conflict or this moment of tension as an opportunity to do something different. And so I think we were seeing this massive, worldwide conflict. And what we really saw was opportunity, right? This is an opportunity to do something different. This is an opportunity to co-create something new and better and more responsive. And what better time to start a business than in the middle of a worldwide pandemic? But we did it. And besides wanting to ensure and support our workplaces and our systems to be able to hold space for all that their stakeholders were experiencing, we also knew there was going to be a huge wave, and we saw it kind of come and go and come back of diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. And we wanted to make sure that in that wave of campaigns, but also in that wave of resource and strategic plans that were going to be developed around these core values, that is done in collaboration and side by side with communities. So often we see people in these fancy rooms with great views, making a bunch of decisions without anyone who's actually directly impacted in that room. And that was a key tenet that we wanted to make sure that we could be a part of changing. And now, 4 years later, we're doing stuff we didn't imagine. I think we're doing a lot of trainings and workshops that we did see happening, but there's this whole other side in terms of implementation and what it actually looks like to make it happen. But we have gotten really excited.
Amazing. I love that we were doing such a similar thing at the same time on different sides of the world, never knowing that I had friends on the other side of the world, right, doing the same thing.
Exactly.
Sascha, I want to ask you a little bit about, so something Corinna said there, you were talking about people in meeting rooms with great views, creating D&I or inclusion policies, you know, without anybody else in the room. And something I say all the time at the moment is, how can you ever include someone if you don't understand them, right? Surely empathy is the starting point. So tell me how you feel about that and what you think we should be doing to bring that into those decisions.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Corinna just touched on it, is that it's so important for the folks that are making the decisions to be in collaboration with the folks that are impacted by the decisions. Because oftentimes, like Corinna said, it's these folks that are detached from what's maybe happening in the community. They're maybe not directly connected to the community, but they're making the decisions for that community. And so I think when we're looking at empathy and understanding, how can we understand someone if we have no sort of connect, like there's no bridge to communicate with them or to connect with them. And so having those folks in the room is the first piece. Like, we can't make decisions for people without having their input. And so that piece is it right there, is we have to have input from those that are being impacted by the decision made.
It seems so obvious, right? When you say it, it seems so obvious. Sascha, why do you think that's not happening? What are the barriers that you're seeing in America to stop that happening?
Yeah, I think one of the things is it's not a common practice. Empathy is not something that is common. And so in order to get to that place, we have to do something different. Our traditional systems aren't set up for empathetic practices. And so we have to be willing to change and do things a different way so that we can have a different result.
And Corinna, when you're doing that and you're seeing it work, what's going well, right? So we can spend all day and all night on LinkedIn talking about how terrible the state of our world is, right? And many people do, and we have to share that information. But for me, I like to focus on where the opportunity is, because quite frankly, otherwise I don't want to get out of bed. So when it's working, Corinna, when you're working with communities, schools, organizations that are saying, yes, Sascha and Corinna, come and help us do this, what is it that's working? Why are they saying yes?
Yeah, I love that question. And I think there's kind of twofold to that too. There's definitely a bunch of people who, once they find out who we are and what we do, we hear oftentimes like, oh, we've been looking for someone like that, right? Like someone who has that knowledge and that background. But then there's this whole other side that you have to convince, right? That like empathy is actually a worthwhile skill that can have a big impact on multiple outcomes that you're looking at. And so I think there's a lot of programs, and maybe Sascha can dive into this in a minute. A lot of really successful programs and training curriculums we're running right now. But I think the thing I get most excited about is when I see those people who are on the fence of like, are you just this like cheery, joyful lady who's going to come in and give me an unrealistic like expectation or goal to try to achieve? And that's not what we do. We really meet people where they're at. And then I think the most beautiful part of how we do our work is, most importantly, we want them to get the experience that we're hoping that they will soon give to whoever their stakeholders are while they're with us. So if they weren't restorative practice believers before, they definitely are when they leave space with us. If they didn't understand the power of trauma-informed practice, they definitely will when they leave sharing space with us, just because it's a different energy that we hold. It's one where people show up and they feel really understood. They feel like there's space for them to be themselves. They feel like there's space for them to be their best selves, but also space for them not to be their best selves, and how to hold that, and how that's okay to be human, and create spaces that are responsive to our humanness, and don't expect perfection or some of these other ideals that culturally, I think, come up a lot. So one thing, I think that's just the main thing, is I get really excited when I see these people who look at me with the skeptical eyes, and in my mind, I'm just saying, you just wait and see.
Yeah, just wait.
You'll see.
Yeah, you'll see. I love that.
Mm-hmm.
So often I travel, and I sometimes am on stages, and Corinna, I know you share a passion with me for India, but sometimes I'll be on a stage and there's like 1,000 people, and I can just see like a sea of suits, tends to be more men in the audience. And I can literally feel that moment where they're like, who is she? Why is she here? And what is she talking about? You know, I've got a busy day ahead. And then you're right, by the end of that, there is, I would say, you know, at least 80% commitment in the room to, maybe I don't really fully understand what she just said in that keynote, but I think I agree, right? She's clearly onto something. So I resonate with that so much, that need to convert people. Sascha, why do they need converting? You know, why is empathy, where did it go? What happened? Why do we have to overcome this barrier, right? Where's it been all our lives?
Yeah, I think that's the piece right there. You said, where did it go? But I think for some, it's never been. And so again, we're doing things different. And so we have to convince some folks because it's something that they've never done. They've never navigated the world through a lens of empathy. And so we're asking them to do something that is out of their comfort zone, that is totally different, and dependent on where they're coming from, may seem, like Corinna said, irrelevant or not important for the things that they think are important. And so in their time with us, it's our job to show them why empathy is so important in every aspect, and to hear what it is that's important to them, and then show them and teach them about why empathy is also important in that thing. So it's like finding the pieces that they value, and then showing them why empathy will improve that.
Data, right, as well, really helpful to have data. And Sascha, when you're with, let's talk about slightly more corporate environments who tend to be a bit more disconnected from humanity in the workplace, what are some of the things you hear that push back against empathy? I obviously hear loads of pushbacks in my work. Do people think it's a soft skill? Do they think it doesn't have a place? You know, what types of things do you hear?
I think often the thing that I hear the most is that, like, they're focused on, let's say, their bottom line, and they don't understand how empathy is going to improve that. They don't understand why their staff need an empathetic environment or what that's going to do for them. And then we come in and we show them that, hey, if your main concern is bottom line in finance, let us show you how that's going to improve that with empathy, because you're going to have a lower turnover rate. You're going to get better quality of work from your folks. So all of these things will also impact their bottom line. And so showing them and letting them see, like, oh, okay, so if the people that work for me feel supported, and they're operating in an environment that allows them to show up as themselves and do their job in a way that feels good, oh, I'm going to get a better product from them. And it's going to last longer because they're fulfilled. And so it's just, I think that's the biggest thing I hear, is folks not understanding why.
Yeah. I always tell them 23% higher profits, 23% higher profits, 23% higher profits, right? My favorite statistic, to keep reminding them, you know, that this is connected to improvement. This morning, Corinna, I read some data from the Business Solver report, the Empathy Report 2024. And there was a piece I hadn't noticed before. They said that so there was 3 reasons that people gave for empathy not being used in their workplaces, which Sascha was talking about there. Leaders made number 1 and 2. Either my leaders don't have time for it, or my leaders don't want it, or my leaders don't believe in it. But the third one was specifically around my time. I do not have time to empathize. So for anyone listening, and anyone who's here, please do drop us a question or a comment. These ladies are very friendly. They're definitely going to answer your questions. But Corinna, for anyone listening who's thinking, I don't have time for this, Mimi, Sascha, Corinna, I'm too busy, you know, like Sascha was saying, managing my bottom line. What's your advice? How do people fit this in? What's the first steps they can take?
Yeah, I think when I think about that and the hustle and bustle that we all get caught up in, it's really important to do a few things. One is There is a little bit of time. That's the first place I would start, right?
You've
Like
always got some.
you do have probably a minute or two to be thoughtful with whoever you're with. So you can spend time saying a proper how are you doing and waiting for the answer and hoping they give you something with some substance instead of the just hello, hi, I'm good, and move on throughout our day. So I would just want to remind people, even I have to remind myself for my mindfulness practices sometimes, like, yes, I get really busy. I always have a moment to breathe, right? I can always reconnect with that center. So if you are feeling like you don't have enough time, take a second to reconnect with yourself, and find a little bit of time. Like, it's when we prioritize things that matter to us, that's part of it. But something that Sascha and I also talk about a lot too is just because we're rooted in empathy doesn't mean we don't have boundaries, right? Like, there are boundaries that you can create to protect your no's and yeses so you can be more present with what's going on in front of you. And so I think that's something I like to remind people too, is you can be empathetic if you genuinely do not have time for that in the moment. You can communicate that in a thoughtful way and then revisit it later, right? So maybe you're rushing in the workplace and you don't have time to listen to a colleague's stressful weekend story, right? What's the harm in saying, like, I love you, give me a second, let's chat about this after work, right? Like, let's go get a coffee, or let's go to happy hour after work and talk about this, and find the time that it does fit in your life. But I think despite the culture that you're in, and just reflecting on culture in the United States, there's always going to be things competing with us being present, with us being mindful, with us spending quality time with people in conversations, and with our really fast-paced technological world, we're losing more of those moments. And so I guess this is just a gentle reminder of being present with where you're at, with who you're with, and have boundaries. Protect your yeses. Say no a lot so that you can be present with the things that you say yes to, and really be able to give those your full attention.
Thank you. I feel like you, in your message there at some point you said, take a moment to breathe, and I literally found myself go, sometimes you just have to hear someone say it, and then you're like, yes, exactly, just take a moment to breathe. Sascha, let's talk a little bit sort of higher than just the business world, society, us, humanity, being alive, some of the things Corinna was talking about. Tell me your thoughts on connection and our need to be connected, to belong, to have people in our lives. You smiled, so I think maybe you like the question. That's good.
I smile because that is so, so important. And I think we live in a time where there's this kind of like instant, we're used to things happening kind of quickly, and we don't necessarily take the time to connect with folks around us and in that way. And it's so, so important, right? Connection, community. We are quite literally made for community and connection. And so that piece is everything, right? Humans are not built to just be alone. And so as we talk about empathy and all of those things, community and connection is a key piece, right? Like having community, what in all forms and different shapes, like, it's so important. It's in essence a part of being human. And so
and we were born with that skill, right? And so I think we lose it because of the way that our systems are set up. So when Sascha is saying we're not used to doing this, we're not used to doing it because it gets trained out of us, kind of, in a way. When we have other goals or other things we need to focus on, other priorities, and this other stuff kind of goes on the back burner. And our core belief at Empathy in Action is we are all born with a tremendous amount of empathy and understanding. That is the first kind of social behaviors we start showing as little ones. It trends towards empathy. It's not the opposite. And so what we try to cultivate is returning to that, right? There's a lot of, when we get really cheesy, we do a lot of like, what does your inner child need and want? What's showing up for you? All of that type of stuff. But again, just remembering like we are naturally created to be this way. And then when we go through stress and trauma and our workplaces and our systems are not prepared to understand us, I think that's where we saw a lot of opportunity to do it differently.
And you talk there about sort of inner child and just going back to that sort of core of who you are, perhaps what you needed as you grew. And like you said, we're so busy we forget sometimes, really who we are. Sascha, you both do work in education, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, with schools, with schooling systems. Tell us about why we need to teach our children this. First of all, why is nobody else doing it? Why is it the responsibility of schools? And second of all, how's that going to improve things for the future?
It's the schools, I think, is a great place for us to be doing it because most of our youth are spending most of their days in school. And so if we can have this be a skill that they're learning and that they're reconnecting with, because as we said, we're born this way, we kind of stray away from it because of life and growing up in systems. So if we can, it's a muscle. So if we can use our empathy muscle and give our youth these skills so that they can build those muscles, it's going to change the way our systems and our environments operate because, right, the youth, they're our future. So if we can give them these skills now, let them hone in on these skills and grow this empathy muscle, our future looks different because our future leaders now have a strong empathy muscle, which our current leaders may not have. And we know, as we've seen, they don't. And so it's so important for us to equip our schools with these tools so that they can then teach our youth so that our world looks different. It serves our youth better. And that as they grow, they're not forced into these environments that currently exist, but they have created new environments that allow them to show up and allow them to support one another. And school, I just feel like, is one of the best places because not only are they spending a lot of their time there, but that's where they're learning so many of their other skills that they're going to need to navigate through life. And this social emotional piece, this empathy piece is just as important as our math, our English, and everything else.
Yeah, and from everything I've read as well, Sascha, you say, just as important, but it also impacts that. So we know that when social emotional learning is improved, maths and English and languages, they all improve too. Literacy goes up, teamwork goes up. So I think that's something, listening to you, that makes me really passionate about it as well, which is that it's critical for humanity. But even if you don't quite believe the three of us on this call yet, it's going to help your children learn as well, right? So it's a no-brainer. I want to answer this question, Corinna. Maybe you can take it from justbe_in down here, asking us, how do you show ROI in the short term, and how do we show the impact and value to make it worth it? If perhaps there's a leader or a team that's not feeling convinced about this, how do you show that ROI? Can you show the ROI?
Definitely. So I think part of that is really specific to whatever the outcomes and the goals are of whatever agency or place that we're working with. But I think because we were just talking about youth, something that I like to use as the kind of ROI metric is a lot of the work that we're doing can also be seen in like a public health light too, of like, how are we preventing impacts of things, or how are we disrupting some of these like negative cycles so that it can be a more positive experience for kids in the community. And so when you also look at ROIs like that, there are quarterly ROIs, there are ROI numbers that you can look at that happen over the span of a year. But if a young person is in the United States, if they are utilizing social services in different ways because their home situation maybe doesn't have all the things needed to support them, or if they go into our juvenile justice system, if they are a young person who's unhoused, that will cost the American taxpayer anywhere from $100,000 a year up. And so when we look at offering something like our restorative justice and schools program, that we specifically try to make sure these services are available for the schools that have higher populations of kids who might benefit from it, which is everyone. But I guess what I mean by that is kids who we call it overexploited areas. So areas where the resources have been taken out of the community and oftentimes not put back into the community. And so when we're working with those kids, a restorative justice in schools program that might have a ticket price for a year of around $100,000, that's doing prevention work for hundreds or thousands of kids, right? And so when you look at that, just number wise, right? Like if I'm talking to a businessman in the district, I will say you're looking at saving millions of dollars in supportive services or intervention services when you start with community building and empathy.
Yeah.
And so, again, something that Sascha said earlier too, it's about connecting it to what their goals are. And so just being, I think one piece of advice I would give in response to this is start with empathy. Like start answering that question with empathy to whoever that person is. What are your goals? What are you looking to avoid? What are you looking to do more of? And then you can really curate what the direct value add is going to be by starting with empathy.
Sascha, do you want to add? I can see you're like nodding in passion there.
I'm in such agreement, but I think that is the key, is you have to find the thing that is important to whoever you're talking to and then show them. You kind of have to lead them along. So you have to find what's important to them and then hold their hand and show them how empathy is going to impact that outcome. But yeah, it's so important to find that piece of what's important to them, because we can connect empathy to everything. We know that it impacts everything. So all you need to do is find the piece that is important to them, and then you will be able to draw the pathway from empathy to that and how that's going to impact the goal of the individual.
I sometimes find that quite, I don't know if it's overwhelming, but to your point there, Sascha, it's connected to everything, so people say to me, what do you specialize in? Well, empathy. Well, then can you do something in schooling? Well, yes. Can you do something in community? Yes. Do you know what I mean? Because you're right. It touches everything.
It drives our marketing team crazy. Because when they're asking for a target audience, we're like, everybody, it's for everybody. I don't know.
I know. Yes. Who am I supposed to segment, Mimi? The world? Yeah. That doesn't help the Instagram algorithm. Yeah, I know. I can see another question came up, which will pop up. But before we just go to it, Corinna, when I first met you, we were talking about educational curriculums. I wanted to share something I learned off the back of your advice. So you were talking about making sure that the educational framework we have has depth, right? Has depth of data. And to this conversation, I don't remember the source, so I'll have to pop it up after. But we found a really good source of information in my team that says that for every dollar spent in empathy, which is in social emotional learning in schools, there is $11 in avoided costs. So 11 to 1, right, in savings, basically. Which is exactly what we're saying. So anyway, we have got a comment down here, a question actually from Samir. Thanks for joining us. I'm assuming you're in India, given your handle there, so welcome. Samir is asking, is living together as joint families, which of course over here in Asia and the Middle East is still very prominent, a better solution to living alone and experiencing issues such as loneliness? So Sascha, maybe you want to give us a thought on that. What's your thinking around sort of cohabitation, intergenerational living, and its impact on that connection you were talking about earlier?
Yeah, I think absolutely it impacts connection, and it is one of the beautiful ways that we can ensure that we have kind of some built-in community, right? If we are living with folks, we're around them, we have the opportunity to be in community with them. We also have the opportunity to practice our skills and use our empathy muscle on a more regular basis because we are with folks more often. And so I would say yes, that definitely would and will impact being lonely or not. If you have a household full of folks, that is going to uh, build community, and you have some kind of built-in community right there with you.
And you've spoken a bit, Sascha, I think you've said it twice. You've talked about empathy muscle. I think I've picked up on that. To that answer, how important is practice to empathy?
It is like any other practice. It's just like if we want to get stronger muscles in our arms, we're going to have to work those muscles every day as often as we can. And the empathy muscle is no different. The more we use it, the stronger it gets, the easier it becomes, the less we have to think about it. And then after a certain point of using that muscle so much, you don't have to think about it. It's just who you are. And it's just how you navigate through the world. And so practice, 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 practice every chance you get.
And there's some science behind that I really like. Sascha and I are both nerdy, but I'll give myself the resident nerd badge. I love me a good peer-reviewed article. That type
Amazing.
of stuff. And something that when Sascha was explaining that I thought of is our neuroplasticity and our neural synapses that get developed the more that we practice these things. And so someone who maybe has experienced a lot of trauma in their life, they'll have literal grooves in their brain of where energy has moved back and forth. And some of those grooves get really deep and some of the synapses get really strong. And so one thing that we do in our trauma work is helping build those alternative muscles, right? So if you think of maybe drawing a line in the sand and pouring some water down it or something like that, if you make another line and connect it and it's deeper than the original line, it will flow in that direction. And so essentially that's what we're doing when we practice empathy. That's what we're doing when we practice trauma-informed practice, or when we're coaching our own bodies or other bodies through responding to stress and trauma in a different way. It will be really hard at first because we have this path that the water just wants to flow down naturally. But if we continue to build the depth of the other path of our neuroplasticity and the other neurological synapses that are happening in our brain, we actually can reroute the way that those things go. And at one point, you'll notice it starts becoming more natural, or it becomes your preliminary response, right? Instead of having a trauma response or a stress response, that's when we'll have kids come back and say, oh my gosh, my body didn't feel activated this time. Or, wow, I was able to calmly identify what I needed and articulate that to the person that I was with. And some of those things seem really small, but it comes from that practice and making that deeper groove so that we flow in that direction.
And I would just say for any leaders listening, and Sascha, I'm going to come straight back to you, is if children can do it, you can do it. You know, so Corinna there saying kids come back and say, wow, I was able to respond differently this time. Well, guys, if the under 12s can do it, if you're a CEO, you can definitely do it. Sascha, I interrupted you by accident. Please carry on.
No, I was just saying that we often see the results quickly with our youth because a lot of times they're more moldable, they're more open to change. But I think it's always so beautiful when they come back and they've used the skills that they've learned in our circles or in our classes, and then they're like, whoa, this really changed my experience. And I think often it's so important to practice it, but I think it's also important to practice it when the stakes are low. So like in our circle, we're building these skills, we're building the tools, but the stakes are low. So then you've built up enough practice so that next time when the stakes are a little bit higher, you're more comfortable using the skills. But if you haven't had enough practice in maybe an environment that's like a safe container, it can be difficult. So I would say as much practice as possible in any environment, but also in safe environments as well.
I want to share a very short story, which I just wrote about in my new book, which talks to this, which is about my daughter. And of course, she's my daughter, so I teach her empathy since she was born. She's 7. And for anyone listening, I just want to exemplify what the ladies are saying here, which is she recently had an issue at the school gates, and I wasn't there. Somebody else was bringing her home. And there was another mother of another child who got very frustrated at a group of them and shouted. And of course, it's not nice for little girls to have someone else's mum shout at them, and her mum wasn't there. So the person bringing her home called me and said, Mimi, I just want to tell you this thing happened. It was a bit scary for her. We're coming home, right? So when she came in the room, I was ready for her to be, I don't know, teary or angry or something. Mummy, this happened. This is like literally like 10 minutes later. We live very close to school. So she comes in, she looks totally fine. And I say to her, babe, did something happen, earlier? And she said, yes. This mummy was very angry and she made us cry because she was shouting. And I said to her, and again, for the audience, she's 7. I think she might have been 6 then. I said, but, tell me why you think that happened. She said, well, mummy, I think probably when she was a child, nobody listened to her. So now as a grown-up, she feels she has to shout to be heard. And I nearly fell off my chair. But I wanted to share that because, Sascha, to your point, the only reason she could make that connection in a time of what was very stressful for a 7-year-old was because we've been practicing it for 7 years, So and I didn't tell her that. I've never told her that. I've never spoken to her about childhood stress or, none of that. She did that in her own little brain in the 10 minutes between crying because this woman was shouting and getting home on her own. She had worked through, what was that behavior? Why did she do it? Can I put myself in her shoes, even though she's a 45-year-old adult and I'm 7? And what I found amazing about that was it healed. She didn't cry. She was like, okay, mum, I'm going to watch cartoons. Bye. She wasn't upset, past the stress moment when this woman was shouting.
Right.
So I love that empathy gives us tools to heal and to recover. Within 10 minutes, she worked it out herself.
Right. Because she has so much empathy already that she could show that to the adults and give the adult empathy, even though they didn't exercise their empathy muscle. Right. But hers was so strong that she was able to do that for herself and continue on, which is
amazing.
Such a beautiful thing.
Oh, so ladies, I feel like I should start to wrap up because I know it's evening time for you. But Corinna, I'd love to just end.
We can keep going for a couple hours.
Good. All right, good. We'll stay here all night.
All night thing. I just got going.
I'm in it now. I'm ready.
Okay, awesome. So what I would love to do again, because much of my audience is on the other side of the world, we see the US through, I guess the media. Tell us just from your side, no politics. Just tell us from your side of the world, why do you see empathy in America or the Americas as so important now? And why does that drive you at Empathy in Action to do the work you're doing?
Ooh, timely question.
I know.
So at the beginning of my career, there was a Mother Teresa quote that always stuck with me. We connected, Mimi, on our love of being citizens of the world and enjoying and appreciating different cultures and ways of life. And something Mother Teresa said is find your own Calcutta, or Kolkata is its name. And it was this idea of like, you don't need to leave your home to do something impactful. And so I recognized, even though I love our international community, there's a lot of work that we need to do in our home country, and our history isn't necessarily rooted in empathy. I think there's a lot of collective healing that can happen. And I think, especially when I think about the next generation of kids, the kids who are in school right now have been through a lot. They really are. They're really resilient. They are adaptable. But there is, I'm not making a generalization, but there is some warranted apathy of like, it's just been a lot. Like, I'm just trying to get through what I'm going to get through and see how adult life happens for me. And so I think one thing I would love to see is us working through some of that with the younger generation, and helping them feel inspired and supported to make the change that they want to see and find their own neighborhoods, right? Find their own areas to make impact. So that's definitely, some of what has been on our heart and some of what has started Empathy in Action in the first place.
Sascha, what about you? What's your purpose here? What do you see in your home country that needs filling?
Yeah, I think like Corinna said, it's just really building our youth. Because again, they are the future. When we're all long gone, they will be the ones here. And so how can we equip them with the tools and the skills to build the world that they desire, and a world that suits this ever changing, it's ever changing. And so how do we give them what they need so that they can change with it, but also make it better? Because we know that the way that we've necessarily operated does not suit everyone. So how do we build a society that does? And it starts with our youth, because they are going to be the ones to continue our change.
Amazing. Beautiful answers. And I think whether you're stateside or Asia or Middle East, the only people that can change the future, right, is the young ones. We have a question from Kuwait, which is fantastic. Ali, hello. Lovely to see you. Salam alaikum. He says, good morning. Thanks for sharing your experience and insights. What are your views that ethics, it's a big question, ladies, for the end of your day. What are your views that ethics are a must as a prerequisite for empathy? From experience, whenever a person isn't very ethical, their empathy tends to either be non-existent or comes across as unnatural. What are your thoughts there, Corinna, about the connection between being ethical and being empathetic?
I think being ethical helps, but I don't think it's a prerequisite. And this is why. I think everyone wants to be understood. And I think when we ask that question of like, what makes you feel understood, or when is the last time you felt understood, people who are ethical and unethical can answer that, right? And so even just in our first person perspective, we know what empathy is to us, and that's enough of a nugget to start with. And then we can build ethical considerations from there. But I think a piece of that I think of often that comes up in our work is when we're talking about racial equity, right? There are oftentimes people who don't believe that they're engaging in behaviors that might be discriminatory or oppressive towards different racial groups. And I don't necessarily need them to come to that understanding first. We just need to start at empathy. And if we start at this understanding of empathy, then we can begin growing the understanding for other people, which sometimes it takes longer for other folks to get there than not. But I will say, I don't think I've ever had a conversation with someone where I haven't seen that needle move just a little bit in our conversation, because you can draw some sort of connection, right? A time where someone didn't feel understood or felt very understood, and how that can and should be replicated for the other people that they're interacting with. And I think it ties a little bit to that original point we were making of like, find what matters to that person and have that be the door to enter into empathy. Because there is always going to be a door, and that door will lead to more ethical considerations, hopefully, too.
Yeah. Sascha, what would you build there?
Yeah, I would say, sorry, what was that?
No, go ahead, Sascha.
Oh, I was going to say, I think that is the key point, is just finding that piece, that little nugget. It doesn't have to be big. It doesn't have to be it can just be a tiny thing. Like Corinna said, when is a time that they felt understood or lack thereof? And I think most people can come up with one piece, and you take that piece and then you use that to navigate through, but it doesn't, but again, yeah, I would say that the ethics does not have, it's not a prerequisite, but that can grow as we use more empathy.
Yeah, really interesting. And Ali, what I would just add to what the ladies have said there is, you mentioned in your comment around they either don't have empathy or it comes across as unnatural. And I think that's a really important point, because empathy has to be authentic. You can't fake it. You know, I think, well, you probably can. That's probably what you're experiencing, Ali. But when you fake it, as you've mentioned, you can sense it. People will know. You know, if you ask someone, please tell me more about that, but then you look at your phone and you look out the window and you're not really listening, well, then that empathy is not going to work. They know you don't really care. You know, they know you're not really saying, can I please understand further? So I think it is important to know that, you know, that empathy has to be real. If you're going to invest into it, then you have to actually invest into it, and not only pretend. So ladies, thank you. It has been a real pleasure, and we should continue, because we could talk, I'm sure, like you said, all night, all day over here in Asia. I'm really happy to see that we've had some engagement from around the world, and just bringing a spotlight as well to what you're doing over there at Empathy in Action. You can see the website is across the bottom. And I know, Corinna, you've got an event coming up, which I'd love other people to hear about. So do you want to tell us a little bit about what that is?
We do. So we have an Empathy in the Workplace training series that's coming up in October. And so it's a 3-part series, 2 hours each, that looks at micro, meso, and macro implications of empathy in the workplace. And so micro is looking at individuals, meso is looking at groups, and macro is looking at systems. And this is a training that is definitely good for leaders, HR managers, all of that type of professionals, but also just someone who's in the workplace. It's a helpful course to take to learn how you can show up in a more empathetic way, and different ways that you can practice building that empathy. And so we're really excited about it. It starts on October 14th, and it will be on October 14th, the 21st, and the 28th. You can go on our website, empathyandactionconsulting.com, and click the events tab at the top, and you should be able to buy tickets on there.
Yes.
Amazing.
I was going to say a key piece about our trainings, and that I want folks to know, is that in action piece is that if you come to anything with us, you will walk away with tangible tools on how to implement this in any of the settings you're in. So you can expect to learn some theory, yes, but you can expect more practical application than just theory. And so we want to make sure that when folks leave us, they have more tools than they came with.
Amazing. Well, that's exactly what they need, right? As we've said many times today, practice creates permanence, and that's a phenomenal opportunity. So we'll pop that link in the comments underneath this as well, so it's clickable. But ladies, thank you. May this be the first of many collaborations from both of our passions, all of our passions, you know, to create more empathy in the world, in the workplace, in society. So yes, do please come and connect with Corinna and Sascha. You've got their names and links down there. They're doing phenomenal work, not just in the workplace, but beyond, as you've heard today, into social change, social shift, social work, and the education system as well. So ladies, thank you for everything you do, because as you've both mentioned, there's never been a time when we need more empathy than now. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you. We were so excited to be here, and such wonderful conversation.
Wonderful. I think we may have lost Corinna just at the perfect time in that we were finishing. But you've frozen there, Corinna. Can you hear us?
I think you might be right. I think she did sneeze.
She's gone. She's obviously gone off to bed. So thank you so much, ladies, for being here. It's been an absolute pleasure. And to everyone that joined, thank you for coming. Meleha, thank you there for your thank you there. It's wonderful to see you were here. We will have this up on our YouTube as well, so you can come and revisit if you did miss any of it. and watch this space for more open room conversations coming really soon. But good night, the US, and have a really lovely evening. Sascha, thank you so much.
Good morning there. Talk to you all soon. Bye-bye.
Bye everyone.